So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our three presenters today. First, we'll have Geeti Silwal, who's an urban design principal at Perkins & Will. I used to work with Geeti, so I'm very excited that she's here with us. As the head of the West Coast Urban Design Practice, Geeti brings vision and design leadership that establishes the foundation of transformative changes for livable and sustainable environments and cities. She strongly believes that urban designers hold the responsibility to inspire integrated, multi-purpose design solutions of innovation and beauty that create healthy and inclusive cities. Next, we're going to hear from Anna Mussig, who's an urban planner and project manager at Gale, where she brings expertise in creative engagement and telling stories about how people use and experience places using data. At Gale, she helps put people at the center of the decisions that shape our cities by leading public life studies, designing the public realm action plans, and by using art to shape the culture of what streets can be. And I'm also excited Anna is here because we went to university together. And Edie Krafchick is the VP of City Development at SUFA, who's responsible for bringing SUFA technologies into cities around the world and developing strategic partnerships with elected and appointed officials, real estate developers, and organizations and individuals with a shared responsibility in shaping the public realm. He's a former urban designer and landscape architect, and prior to SUFA, worked on neighborhood and citywide community development projects across the U.S., tourism, master planning in the Middle East, and detailed public space and park design globally. So without further ado, I'll pass the ball to Geeti. Geeti, take it away.
Thank you, Jessie. It is an honor. Good morning, everybody. I am excited to be part of this conversation and will focus most of my slides to show you how we are thinking here in Perkins & Will, which is a research-based design practice, really thinking about the future trends and thinking about street design and how it impacts our experience of the city. And as the city goes, so goes the planet. So how it really has a possibility of making the right positive impact on our planet and our ecosystem. So with that, I want to just making sure the slides are moving here. The conversation I want to kind of have right now is primarily focused around what is the space we have, which is streets are about 25 to 35% of the city fabric, and what we will enable is what we will get. So the more we focus on vehicles, the more we will get movement of vehicles, but the more we focus on places and people, the more of that we will see in our environment. Taking a step back and really kind of trying to think about what streets are primarily for is really about equitable and safe access to shared spaces. These are places that bring all people of all walks of life, all modes, making sure that there is multiple purposes that these spaces are serving. And that's really an opportunity for folding or unfolding of the city life in these spaces. But what's happened in the recent past and over the decades is our focus and our impression of streets has been primarily about vehicles and cars. And we are at a point where we kind of think about streets, and the image that conjures in our mind is of cars, and that's been the focus. And it's the technology that's kind of coming into play in recent times has been so focused on making sure that there is more of car movement, but or also enabling and giving us a lot more flexibility and convenience, but still looking at cars as a solution for the problem that cars have solved. So I think we are at a place where there needs to be a shift in paradigm about how we define streets. Maybe streets are not about corridors, and maybe streets are not about arterials, and they are not just networks, but they are places. They are livable places of everyday joy for all common man. And if we would kind of really set ourselves or give ourselves the clear objectives of what we want 30% of our city fabric to be in service of, we might want to kind of take a look at where we are going with our issues and problems around public health, is there an opportunity for streets to kind of come on board and be a solution for public health? Climate change is another challenge that we are facing, and social equity is also at the forefront of our minds as we think about development. So as we look to solve these challenges, do streets give us the ability to kind of really focus our attention on the right metrics and the right performances that we would like to see in these spaces? And putting people first is going to help us look at some of the solutions that we need to be focusing on. Human connectedness. I couldn't help but share an image from one of my vacations in Rome, and really it gives one so much joy to see the spaces and the streets that we all kind of aspire for, just the European kind of models about how they are places where life spills out, and there is so much of socializing and there's so much of lingering on these streets because streets are synonymous with people. Our work in Atlanta, out of our Atlanta office, has been on a really prominent project called Atlanta Beltline, where the primary focus of this right-of-way has been for pedestrians and bike and in future enabling transit. So it is about taking cars away from the equation, but focusing on movement of more people in nature. A project in Mission Rock here in San Francisco on the waterfront, working with the San Francisco Giants, is putting into place a fabric or a network where it's possible for more opportunities for prioritizing people in shared right-of-ways, where cars are secondary to people. And a work that we have done here in San Francisco on Market Street, and Gale Architects were part of our team that we had put together in looking at how streets in these main corridors of our cities have a priority and a focus around public life, and there are zones carved out for people to socialize and be in these spaces where and mobility is alongside placemaking. The other piece of our streets that needs to really brought to the forefront is how we address the planet and what is our response to the environment. Carving out places and carving out widths in our streets to be about really investment around health for the people, health for the city, and hence health of the planet. These are just photographs from my travels, which I felt were really doing a great job in terms of infusing green infrastructure into the city and into the street right of way to make sure that there is ecological functions and there's nature integrated into the public right of way. And how we interact with these features, and how there's an opportunity for really sustainable and an ecological response to treating storm water. And in fact, in this project in Portland, Hustle and 8 looked at treating gray water and tapping water from the buildings nearby to actually find a way to clean it and have people be aware and be interacting with these spaces. And they are about bringing nature and natural processes and making it a safe and an affordable and a sustainable way to kind of interact with nature and address some of the challenges we have. And inviting, besides human beings, inviting the beneficial bugs and critters into the ecosystem. So it's a great opportunity for us to kind of think about the space that these actions and these interventions really need. And thirdly, focusing on a clear objective of prosperity, be it providing for opportunities and prosperity that is enabled through economic opportunities that allows everybody enough space to kind of move around and access jobs, and providing opportunities for social opportunities, access to education, access to social spaces. It is something that our streets have to make sure that they allow for in our streets, and that means prioritizing mass transit, high occupancy vehicles, and creating dedicated lanes in these spaces so that communities of all kinds and of all types and all ethnicity are able to get about easily and more affordably. Some examples from our projects being worked on, this is the last one was in Santa Clara in California. Our work looking at good TODs in Santa Clara and San Jose really focused on how you could look at all the different kinds of micromobilities being accessible, but at the same time not compromising on the biggest shared mobility that we have, which is transit, be it bus or monorail or light rail. Our transit focusing on the reliability and frequency of mass transit is definitely something our streets need to be dedicated towards. This is an example from a campus environment in Technology Enterprise Park in Atlanta, where a larger part of the right-of-way is dedicated to people and to transit, and it minimizes the space that is just for single occupancy vehicles. So looking at how we reclaim streets, and this is a quick graphic to talk about how we might want to look at the real estate within the street right-of-way to be focused more around carbon neutral moves and modes. And what if we say 80% of the right-of-way is focused around giving back to the environment and making it about planet, and pushing the envelope to get to 100% of the right-of-way being about environment and a carbon neutral zone, where there are people and transit that are electrically powered in this active mode in the space, in this zone. You can see how in this graphic I've kind of squeezed the single occupancy vehicle and cars primarily into just 2 lanes, and giving back to the bikes and the transit and bioswales, which is introducing nature and spaces for people. And what if the same 80% was also a metric or a performance we target for people being able to get to the opportunities, economic and social opportunities that is important for them to access for a prosperous existence? And what if 60% of the right-of-way was primarily focused around people, in making sure that public health, both in terms of physical health and active nodes being available in this space, being a priority and a focus. And it is also about socializing, and it's also about the mental health of people as there's opportunity for people to linger and to be connected with other human beings. If these were our metrics to kind of define how we really start to define and how we try to establish the parameters that we evaluate our streets by, those might just shift how we think and how we deliver streets in the future. So in closing, I just want to say the livable places of joy is possible in our streets if we kind of really change the paradigm and we change our lens to talk about, to really focus on identity, talking on diversity, talking about responding to the environment you're sitting in and enabling nature, responding to the environmental factors, and introducing a space for culture and art. With that, I will hand it to Anna.
Thanks, Geeti. Good morning, everybody. My name is Anna Musig. I'm an associate at Gale, and I want to talk a little bit about the future of street design as it relates to our work at Gale, which is about the intersection between social science and design. We focus on making cities for people. So I want to start also where Geeti started as well, which is if I could ask all 541 of you, where did you last go on vacation? Just think about that for a minute. Maybe you went to a place that looked lush and beautiful, like this place in Greece. It delighted your senses. It made you want to slow down and enjoy your experience. But maybe you came home to a city that looked like this. This is in Boise, Idaho. What I want to interrogate in our time together now and in the question session is, why don't we build streets like the ones that we visit on vacation for our everyday lives? And this is not just a matter of enjoyment, it's also a matter of economic imperative, an environmental imperative, and imperative at this moment in time. The choices that we made a century ago still affect us today, we know that. And we also know that we're creating visions about the future that are replicating some of those same mistakes for our future. So this is meant to be a city of tomorrow, but I see a lot of similarities from the city that we created 100 years ago with the values of 100 years ago. We may think that we've got this all figured out. I think one of the reasons why many of us are here in this conversation is because we're interested to understand what will happen with changing mobility technology in our cities. And the reality is that autonomous vehicles certainly won't solve some of the critical issues in our streets, which include rising pedestrian deaths, even while we have safer and safer private vehicles. So we have an opportunity to get this right for the next century. The streets that we design today are going to express our values of today for the next century, so we better get it right. So I have a couple of ideas to share with you on this topic. The first is that streets are not about getting from A to B. Certainly, there's important qualities of efficiency and movement and access that our streets give to us. Yet, I think that by focusing on efficiency, we're missing out on the important things that streets give to our societies, which includes the fact that streets make up more space in our cities and all of our parks and plazas and things that we think about as public spaces. Streets make up more than 80% of our public spaces in cities. They make up about 20 to 30% of all of our land area in our cities. So they can do a lot more for us than just getting us from A to B. Like what? What can streets do for us? So, we think about streets as connecting us to our neighbors and to ourselves. They connect us to our communities. They're places for socialization and listening to each other. Eavesdropping is actually an underappreciated, wonderful quality that we experience in our public realm. We think about movement, getting on and getting about as a quality experience. Streets deliver to us serendipity and delight, the things that we often move to cities for. They're important spaces of expression that are part of our public realm and our civic discourse. And finally, they connect us to, yes, the climate, all the wonderful aspects, the dappled light and the sense of environmental quality and microclimate, but also to our changing weather, and that's important as well. So how do we, connect with all of these important qualities of streets? We at Gale talk a lot about the human scale. We think that you can unlock the potential of streets by celebrating the human scale. And the good news is that everybody, even this girl playing in Freiburg, Germany, is an expert in the human scale. So what is the human scale? It's something about moving at the same speed as everyone else around us. We move at an average speed of 5 kilometers an hour. Our senses are incredibly important to us. They make us feel safe or unsafe in a space. Despite our age or abilities, we all experience streets at the same average height, which means, and with our eyes sort of pointed slightly down, which means that the bottom floor, the first floor of a architectural structure or a street or a building is actually the most important to us, not the cornice line, not the things at the top. It's what we see from eye level. And finally, we need stimuli. So what does that mean? We need 1,000 stimuli per hour to stay interested in our surroundings. A wall like this will make us feel unsafe and will feel like it took us a lot longer to walk it. Whereas if we walk at a standard walking speed, 3 miles per hour, we need something interesting to make us feel safe and comfortable about every 4 seconds. It just so happens that this relates exactly to a nice fine grain of a human-centered street. There's a few other principles of the human scale. Scale matters when it comes to the conditions for public life, to socializing. So to put this not in a diagram, but in an image, the space on the right, these could both be streets and public spaces. The space on the right invites us to be close to one another and actually have human scale interactions. Whereas the space on the left, it's blown out, it's huge. You don't even have the opportunity to meet someone, maybe someone that is not like you. So how do we know all this? Why do we think about these things? We have been studying public life and adding to these rules of thumb, these principles of how we design for the human scale over the last 50 years. Our firm, Gale, is based on the work of Jan Gale. And he shaped the city of Copenhagen, which in the 1950s looked a lot like most of our American cities today. It was choked by cars. Yet by studying the public scale, by studying the human scale, by putting public life at the center of the goals for the city of Copenhagen, the city often tops a lot of the charts for livability and so on. It's a wonderful place for people. But it's not just these big, wonderful walking streets, it's also everyday streets. So here's an example of one of the things that works in Copenhagen. It's that streets are designed not for mobility technology, but for how people want to move, which means that slow human walking goes on the outside where it's protected, and fast mechanized movement goes in the center. There are layers of protection and pieces of design that help keep you feeling comfortable and moving at the speed that you want to move. Interestingly, in Copenhagen, in this model, cyclists are actually treated more like fast pedestrians, not like slow cars, which is a better place for them. There's something else in this gesture, as you can sort of notice. The walking path moves down this large boulevard across the connecting streets. There's sort of a nice table so that you, as a pedestrian, don't have to walk into the roadbed in order to cross the street. It's a small way of adding a simple gesture to put people first. So it's not just networks like this, it's also really, really small, and I would add extremely cheap things that make you feel comfortable in a city like Copenhagen, like this rail that helps you blast off when you're stopped at a light, and like these bike lanes, which are actually designed to have two cyclists riding in the same direction so they can have the same quality of interaction as they might have driving in a car, but they can have it riding a bike. So all these things are actually built into the rules and regulations of the city of Copenhagen. But I want to say the story of Copenhagen is not just a story about place, how special it is. We can all be social democracies like socialist democracies. It's also about something about human-centered design, which is not to say selfish design, self-centered design. It's about making the easiest choice for the individual, also the best choice for a society. So what do I mean by that? If you look at why people in Copenhagen cycle, it's not because of the environment, although it is good for the environment. It's not for financial reasons, although it is good for that. It's not even for exercise. Most people cycle in Copenhagen because it's the easiest, fastest, most convenient thing for them. It also happens to trickle up to great mode share, reduction in CO2, and so on. So taking this to the American context, I'm guessing a lot of people are on this call because they are vexed, curious, excited, scared about changes in mobility technology. So I want to share some of what we've learned on this topic. We think that you can use new mobility technology to change mindsets, meet city goals, and foster a culture of civility, which is really missing in this moment. So first, let's just acknowledge that micromobility is an amazing tool for mobility and all these things, but also for mindset change. It helps people connect to a sense of fun and enjoyment of moving at a human speed. And it helps us sort of like put on the decoder glasses, see into the matrix, and see that streets are really made for cars. We should embrace this and not reject it. Second, I want to say that micromobility can be designed to help cities meet their policy goals. So what you're seeing in front of you is an understanding of how micromobility can help cities reach their goals related to prosperity, equity, sustainability, and access. If you look at what these graphs are what these maps are showing us, it's actually that some of the biggest impacts can be felt not in the downtown, but actually in the outer areas where micromobility can be used as a last mile to transit and things like this. Cities can use the powers at their disposal that they write into permit processes and defining service area boundaries to meet their goals. Finally, I want to say, the maps and models can tell us certain things, but a lot of the challenges that we see with micromobility on our streets have to do with a challenge of civility. And you guys see it all the time, every day. We do here in San Francisco. It really doesn't feel like the mobility of the future. We've got to navigate this awkward grade change made for wheel stops for private vehicles. People don't respect micromobility in the street. And people who are trying to ride with sort of civility have to use the same curb ramps as people walking. But what would it look like to design a system that actually uses design to sort of foster a sense of civility? We see this in Copenhagen. What would it mean to have micromobility parking that's as visible and dignified as car parking? To have tiny little curb ramps so that you don't have to ride on the sidewalk and bump into your fellow pedestrians. We're trying things like this in the United States, which is exciting. And there's lots of other things that we really could just play around with and have fun with on the streets to show people that they matter in the street, that their choice to ride these modes, use these modes, that they belong, that experience is dignified. So this is sort of all a manifesto to say the street of the future should express our values for the next century, make the easiest choice for the individual, also the best for society, and use design to foster a culture of civility so that we don't have to go on vacation to enjoy our everyday lives. So that's what I wanted to share with all of you. You can learn more about our work at Gale. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ed Krafchick. I am the Vice President of City Growth at a company called SUPA. For those of you who are not familiar with SUPA, we spun out of MIT a number of years ago and ever since have been working with cities and real estate developers to bring technology into the public realm. And what I wanted to talk about today is really focus on what we think about and how we think about making sure that the public still has agency over this technology that is coming into their neighborhoods. And I'm so happy and thrilled to have followed Anna directly because so much of what Gale is doing, thinking about how people experience the neighborhoods they live in, the neighborhoods they work in, we are operating right on those sidewalks and we are bringing technology right into those neighborhoods at eye level. So I want to spend a few minutes today talking about our process and share a case study of how to put this into practice, how to actually get public input in a productive way from a case study that we're working on together with the City of Boston. So let me start with a story. I live in New York City in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, and I have a dog. So every day I start my day and I end my day walking my dog around Fort Greene Park. And what I see around the park are moments like this all the time, where people are having picnics, families are playing, people are meeting friends, and there's this super interesting dynamic where the park becomes whatever someone wants it to be. And I think having that ownership, having that voice over how this public space gets used and how it really reflects what the neighborhood wants is something that conceptually we think a lot about at SUPA as it relates to building physical hardware and placing that physical hardware into the city. And now we're at a time where thinking about this and thinking about agency over this technology, just like people have agency over Fort Greene Park, is super important because tech is getting deployed faster than ever and it's landing in our neighborhoods. Oftentimes, we don't even know that it's coming. And the next day we wake up and there's a sensor installed, there's a sign in the ground. And what we are trying to do at SUPA is prevent this kind of narrative. Now, some might say this is overplayed and Minority Report is what it is. But in fact, this is happening, right? We are, as citizens of neighborhoods and cities, walking through public realm, walking through shopping centers, more and more of the content that we see around us and the way that we experience place is becoming personalized one-to-one. And at SUFA, what we're saying is, and I think very similar to how Gail is thinking about the built environment, we need to deploy technology in a way that embraces the social connectedness of the places we live. We move to cities for connectivity, for community, and as we rely more on more and we let technology come into the public realm in a way such that we don't even know what data we're giving off, that connectedness leads to more isolation. We are served things in a one-to-one manner in a place where we've come for community. And so what we've built at SUFA is a tool that really counteracts that one-to-one and embraces the ability and reflects the neighborhoods and gives people shaping how and what they see and how and where they see. What you're looking at on the screen is the neighborhood. Quickly, this is a solar-powered freestanding digital sign. It is displaying content at eye level. It uses electronic paper, so imagine a big Amazon Kindle reader in your neighborhood. And what makes this so unique and what reflects our belief in creating community and using technology so is that all of the content that is displayed on these signs in neighborhoods across the generated. So what you're seeing here is a quick a web application accessible. You walk outside in a neighborhood, you go to talk.com, and you post content. And that content can be everything from an event.
Hey, Ed, just pause for a second. You're cutting out a little bit, so maybe just move over slightly for your phone.
And so what we are doing is enabling things like this to happen. When we put a sign in the ground in a neighborhood, and we work really closely with the city and the community to plan where it goes and why, we have experiences like this, where local business owners now have access to a digital bulletin board where they can promote things that they're doing. They can drive traffic to their store. We have examples like on the right, a photographer in the foreground is content on the sign advertising a show that he's promoting, which is happening down the street. And so by a platform that is democratized and open for everyone, we can let people more fully experience the neighborhoods that they live in, they work in, and they play in, and change the dynamic of how the public realm looks and feels as cities are getting smarter. Now, this is something that does require a business model that works. And the way that we think about this and the way that we actually are able to implement these signs into neighborhoods is we've created a public amenity. We've created a place for people to advertise things they care about, for people to promote and connect. And now, all of a sudden, we have this community amenity that is really attractive for local businesses to sponsor. And so an example of this is in Brookline, Massachusetts. We're working with our annual sponsor, Brookline Bank, who really wants to be part of this neighborhood amenity, this neighborhood newsfeed, and is willing to pay to have their brand associated with it. Now, when we do that, we also create the opportunity for revenue share and are able to come full circle. We're putting technology in the ground in a neighborhood. It's being used by neighbors, sponsored by local businesses, and the revenue that's generated is then shared back to the city or the town, used for things like public art funds and neighborhood improvements. Very quickly, before we open for question and answer, for all the city leaders on the call, I want to share an example of what the city of Boston is doing through an initiative called Beta Blocks. So Beta Blocks is a unique partnership with Emerson College and the Emerson Engagement Lab and a number of other partners that lets a city like Boston actually experiment with technology by putting it out into the public realm for a certain duration of time and letting communities experience it as if it was really there. And so what that means for us as a technology company is we could deploy our technology in neighborhoods like Chinatown, Boston, Lower Alston in Boston, Codman Square, a very wide diversity of neighborhoods, and people can experience this technology and actually give us feedback, candid feedback. How is this going to be useful? What can we do to make it more useful? Is this something we want? So it gives us as a tech company a way to actually evaluate how important the problem is that we're solving for communities. It gives the city now a new tool to evaluate before entering into, say, a 5-10-year contract with a technology provider, whether it's SUFA or any other vendor out there, a really streamlined way of getting meaningful public feedback so that before this contract commences, there's data that says this is valuable, this is actually demanded by the public. So I certainly encourage And we could talk about this more in Q&A. Beta Blocks is a really wonderful initiative, and I think one that I would love to see more cities and also more design firms embrace to get more candid public feedback, because when we do, we can actually build features together with the community. So we're enhancing our sign every day, we're developing our product, and we're doing this in tandem with the communities that we work with through Beta Blocks. So I think just to sum it up, what's so valuable about being part of this engagement is that we get firsthand community feedback. When we do that, we're able to co-develop solutions, and that means changing the way that we lay out content on the screen. That means changing how we make it possible to upload content, making it really something that is for the community by the community. The city on their side is simplifying the installation and permitting process so we could really put technology in the ground quickly, and we don't have to wait for months and months and months of approvals and signatures. We can streamline this, put technology in the ground, and test it. And then what's most important is that this is a real life experiment. And what we are looking for from the tech side of it is we want people to experience what we're building and what we're creating and putting in their neighborhood as if it's really there, not just a demo in City Hall, not just a pop-up for a few days, but I want you to walk by it every day on your way to the subway, when you're going to the coffee shop every morning. What is this like in your neighborhood? Because you're going to live with it for a number of years after. And Beta Blocks lets all those questions be answered and more. And I think for us, this is how we approach technology in the public realm. It goes back to that experience of Fort Greene Park, walking the dog and seeing someone picnicking, seeing friends and families hanging out. We want to make sure that when we're putting technology, we give the public agency over that technology, whether it's about where it gets placed, how it gets used, and who benefits. That's for us where we really thrive. And with that, thank you very much, and we'll open it up for question and answer.
Thanks so much, Ed. Thanks, Geeti. And we have bunch of questions, so we're going to move into our Q&A. If anyone has any questions, please type them into the questions control panel on the right of your screen. Quickly, Ed, since we just heard from you, 2 combined questions. Is the user interface interactive, and how did you decide to shape it the way you did?
So the physical screen is not touchscreen. The interactivity for us comes through the ability for the public to post content through a web application. So it's a simple zupatalk.com URL, and that's where you have access to all of the signs in your neighborhood. The shape of it is, number one, for minimizing the amount of square footage necessary to place this in the public realm. So it's just about 4 square feet, fully solar powered. So there's actually a solar panel on the top, which is why it's curved to optimize the amount of sunlight we're able to get and the power we generate. And then overall, we are working on with cities is when we locate these, putting them and angling them in a way so that they are right in the main view cone of someone walking on the sidewalk.
Great. There's 2 questions. One about languages. Is there real-time translation available? And also, how do you ensure that they're available to people in wheelchairs and people with disabilities?
So great question. So the language is made possible now. So like we have bilingual content coming up all the time. And one important thing to remember is most of the content that one will see on the screen is actually user generated. So that would be like, for example, we created templates to be possible to upload characters as opposed to just letters. And that content then is user generated, and we've created the tool to make that possible. In terms of ADA accessibility and legibility, it is a grayscale display. And we work very closely with, example, Town of Brookline, with their ADA commission. Every location that you've seen, every location that we get approved is actually through site walks and with ADA compliance officers. So everything is within the ADA guidelines.
Great. Thanks for that. Geeti, back over to you. Couple questions that I'm going to combine. How do you think about the maintenance and programming of events? How should they occur on city streets? And then second question is, do you think that agriculture and streets can mix together like what's happening somewhat in the revitalization of Detroit. So maybe there's events in ag. Where do those fit in?
Sure, absolutely. I would say events. I really strongly believe that putting human beings right in the center stage and human interaction right in the center stage is enough of an event and enough of a kind of a I would activity that really makes and provides for the kind of social connectedness that we are looking for. But yes, beyond putting human beings and common man on center stage, making sure that cities have an opportunity to make places about or identify areas that can be programmed and have zones within the streets that allow for that kind of a public life that can serve multiple purposes. Maybe it is about closing the street or having opportunity in the public realm to host vendors or to have food carts or to have farmers market. That's definitely a lot of opportunity in the streets, and especially if you really dedicate a large part of the right of way to be about slow movement and less about dedicated kind of traffic. So that is for the events. And in terms of agriculture, I strongly do believe that there is a lot of opportunity to integrate agriculture onto streets. Why we haven't given it much of a thought, but street trees are a great opportunity to be thought about as fruit trees, and they can be planted and harvested to really promote commercial agriculture. It is definitely a much more, I would say, kind of taking a leap here in terms of imagining what the agriculture and what the kind of planting and vegetation on streets could be, but there is so much opportunity to embed urban agriculture in the common streets, since it's a large part of our city fabric and it can serve multiple purposes.
Great. Thank you. Anna, over to you. Juliana, Danielle, and a few others have asked, all of this is amazing and seems obvious. I imagine, though, it's expensive to implement. Is the cost the biggest hurdle? There's also a lot of questions about, can this be accessible in low-income neighborhoods? I think there's clearly some of the things you shared is more, tactile urbanism of a trash can at Angle is probably cheaper than redesigning the whole street. But can you talk a little bit of what's the biggest hurdle and how do you accommodate for cost in maybe small and medium-sized cities or neighborhoods that don't have budgets
Sure.
like the new neighborhoods?
Yeah, great questions. I love that people think that it's exciting, amazing, and you know what? It's actually so much cheaper than redesigning the status quo. You see cities all around the country approving measures to redesign streets. For example, in New York City, there was I think an ADA lawsuit that resulted in many intersections in New York City having to redesign and re-pour the streets of their for curb cuts to make sure that curb cuts are accessible to people with disabilities. So moments like this, we are all the time redesigning streets with the values of 100 years ago and not the values of today. That money, it's not a problem of money. Talk to me after. It's definitely not a problem of money. If you think about some of the examples that I showed, I purposely showed a range from the simple sidewalk patch to the incredibly beautiful intermodal station design in Nørreport in Copenhagen. The biggest problem is actually bureaucracy and building public support, showing people that this is something, showing elected leaders and politicians, giving them the political courage to do these things. You asked me about, how some of these ideas might thrive in smaller or mid-sized cities. Actually, that's where we're seeing a lot of the innovation in these topics. Many of the big cities are challenged with size, with many different organizations that have vested interests and a lot of sort of NIMBY culture. It's actually the small to mid-sized cities that have the flexibility, the sort of social compact to experiment with some of this stuff. So it's been really, really interesting to see mid-sized cities experimenting with micromobility policies. That's where I see Santa Monica's with the sort of wheels-only ramp in one of my examples. So that's to answer that question. And then to make this comment about, is this accessible to low-income communities? Absolutely. And low-income communities have been doing this stuff on their own for themselves for a very long time. So this is actually an instance where we can learn a lot from neighborhoods that have sort of bootstrapped some of their own solutions to create the public life that they want to see, and not just import nice, beautiful things. Sort of like nice paving or things that we might think would be nice in every neighborhood. We can actually learn what more low-income neighborhoods have been doing and actually use those ideas citywide.
Fantastic. So this is a question, Anna, Geeti, and Ed, for all of you, from Hans Christian Rufer and many others. Actually, it's combining questions. What is the number one tool you use to overcome resistance in the process of implementation? So Anna, the number one tool for you first.
Okay, great question. I wish we could do this today on this webinar. It's actually to go outside together. Like, just go outside. If you're in a meeting and you're having a sort of conceptual conversation and everyone's sort of going back to their old stale talking points, just go outside and experience life together in the site that you're working on. This is going to be the number one thing that unlocks a sense of potential, even for people that you think are just intransigent. We've been working for many years in Denver's 16th Street Mall and had a lot of questions about how do you change traffic there? How do you redesign that street to be more inviting to people? We thought that the Transit Authority wouldn't be interested in experimenting with this, but we brought them outside during a series of sort of Reclaim the Streets days. And it was those sort of human one-to-one experience where people take off their hats, their sort of professional hats, and embody the sort of expertise that we're all born with, which is our human senses and our perception. So that's the number one tool.
Great. Thanks, Anna. And Geeti, what's your number one tool to overcome resistance to change in the implementation process?
Absolutely. I would say I think the resistance comes from people who love their cars and definitely find it so much more convenient to move around in their private vehicles. But it is very understandable and it's very obvious that is an easy and a convenient mode, primarily because that is the current paradigm that they are having to operate in. So in terms of a tool, I think thinking about the future of streets has to be thought about also as future of land use planning and how we really enable, say, 15-minute walk-shade communities that people can get to diverse uses by walking and biking. And then it'll be easier for people to imagine the future where the reliance on cars and the reliance on and thinking of cars as being convenient is not so much of an obstacle. So yeah, integrating land use planning into really informing and enabling the streets that we want to desire is a tool that we have to really work with on a policy level.
Okay, great. And Ed?
For us, it is getting buy-in from the local business community. And that could be through business associations, Chamber of Commerce. I think when we're looking at where does a process get stuck in public approval, oftentimes we have elected officials that are questioning, how important is this? Is this something that I'm actually going to be reelected for if I sign off on, or is it going to harm me? And when we're looking at what matters most or who's going to benefit the most from increased traffic, from longer dwell time, from more connected communities, it is hands down the local business owners. More traffic means more people in the store, means more sales. And where we win oftentimes is getting the buy-in and building a coalition of support from local business owners.
Great. Wow, we have so many questions. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. I'm going to go to Maru. Maru, I can't pronounce your last name. But he says, for cities like mine in Tunisia, we don't have large street widths, yet crowded with cars, and decision makers are opting for enlarging streets instead of making them more vibrant. How do I convince them that countries all over the world are trying to reverse the large streets and roads that they have? Anna, over to you first.
Wow, that's such a great question. And, I recognize that many of the images that I showed were for typical American streets, which are extremely wide and built for cars. There's a whole different set of sort of recommendations and approaches for streets that were initially built at the human scale and are suffering from different challenges of congestion and congestion. And New York City is actually one of these cities right now as well, and is thinking about expanding their sidewalk widths and all the challenges that come from the limited space that we have in our public right of way. As a recommendation for this interesting question that I would love to think about more, think about streets. Every street doesn't have to do everything, right? We have a palette of options, and we think about, at Gale, we think about streets as part of networks. So some streets can be streets for fast-moving vehicles. Some streets can be slow streets. Some streets can be neighborhood streets. It's about building a public space network that includes connective fabric of streets. That's going to lead you to, really investing in streets as wonderful places, and other streets for people who are going longer distance and need to move more quickly.
Great. Quickly over you to Ed, because we're running out of time. Amran Ali is asking, how do you see street furniture interacting with new mobility technology, generally, and for Sufa?
Yeah, well, the short answer is a lot. I think where we are seeing the most natural synergy is the fact that street furniture like ours that is, say, 7-ish feet tall is great to actually just demarcate where in the future there's going to be more scooter corrals or mobility corrals. So I think like in the example of where we're working with the town of Brookline, we're starting to think as scooters are going to be allowed post-pilot next year, and how will they change the shape of and the feeling of the curbside. People need to know outside of the app where these things get parked and where they get picked up. So I think one of the most natural ways that we work together is being a physical asset in the public realm that helps someone on a scooter or a bike know where to end up going. And then also for us, one of the biggest partners we have in cities like Atlanta and towns like Brookline are the scooter companies themselves. Everyone wants to have a safer scooter ridership experience. Certainly the operators want that more than anything, just like the cities do. And so we often are using our signs, and I think digital signage generally can be a great tool for this. Not everyone is an app user of the micromobility solution, and those companies need to reach safety messaging and engage people outside of their app ecosystem. And so signage like ours and others is hugely valuable for that.
Great. Thank you. Geeti, over to you. What is the number one thing we can do to make streets more accessible for children and the elderly?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. It's about, we constantly plan for 8 to 80, and we look at ways how you can have buffered areas, especially as we're talking about active modes, looking at bike lanes that really have an opportunity for people to feel comfortable and not feel threatened by the volume of traffic. So not squeezing them into the right of way with a 4-feet wide lane, but really making it generous, making it about, how about we think about them as wide as 10 feet, and as the way the cars have an opportunity to kind of be in wider spaces, what if we can make these the bike lanes be much wider, and they're buffered and they may be separated by trees. That'll invite and that'll make people a lot more comfortable being on streets. And in terms of the public realm, making sure that there is enough of an opportunity for people to do other activities by introducing places to sit, places of art, places that actually have an opportunity for people to express their culture and their identity. It makes it inviting, and it makes it much more engaging and much more fun for all age groups. and makes it a place for the community to come out from their buildings and from their environments and socialize. So thinking of them as places to linger and places to socialize by giving it the space and the width, I think will definitely make it so much more accessible for all age groups.
Great. Anna, anything to add to that quickly? 30 seconds or 60 seconds?
Oh my gosh, 30 seconds. I'll just say benches and wonderful places to sit. You know, I think we're in this conversation about streets, we sort of get stuck in this idea of movement and efficiency and speed, when actually, to Geeti's point earlier, the greatest thing that we can do is also land use, you know, bringing the things that we need closer to us so we don't have to travel so far. And that's something that really shows up when you see the world through the lens of a 8-year-old or an 80-year-old.
Great. And Ed, finish with you. I know Sufa started with the solar bench. I think that was your first product. Do you want to have anything to add and talk about how the Sufa product has evolved over the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started with the bench, we had a great opportunity working with totaled like 125 cities, and that was either working with the city government directly or working with real estate developers who really care about creating spaces that people want to be in. I think for us, the biggest learning is really what I talked about, in the idea being that whether we're building a park bench that does phone charging, if we're building a digital sign that is for community conversation and use, we have to always think about how to engage people in the process as early as possible, as often as possible, and that's leading up to the deployment of technology, that's during the initial rollout, and that's certainly over time, because these things are going to be installed, not just what we build, but lots of technology, hardware products that go into the public realm are installed for long, long periods of time, and making sure that we are always thinking about how to enhance and how to evolve based on the changing needs of residents is super important. So that for us over the past 5 years is really baked in our DNA. And my only hope is that more technology companies, I know a lot do, but thinking about like how does the technology company work with the city, work with the design team to ensure that we're constantly iterating, because neighborhoods change way too fast for things to stay the same for many years.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, we have dozens and dozens of questions we didn't get to. We had probably one of the largest webinars we've ever had in the history of Meeting the Mind. So clearly this is a popular topic. We will be trying to tackle this topic at all of our events over the next year and a half through webinars, our annual summit in Phoenix, our City Mobility Summit in May in Canada, which is on our website if for those of you Canadians who are joined us today. So thank you everybody so much for joining us. A short survey will pop up when you close your browser, and we really appreciate your feedback. We hope to see you at one of our upcoming events, which are all available on our website, meetingoftheminds.org. A huge thanks to our presenters today for taking the time to share their work and their thought leadership with us. Thank you so much, Geeti, Anna, and Ed.
Thank you. It's been great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great. Have a great day, and thanks again, everybody, for attending. That concludes our session. See you next time.